So we have 2 lectures coming up now on emotion. First one, nature of emotion today, and then aspects of emotion, which picks up on some of the emotion elements in a little more depth. There's then 3 chapters, so 3 lectures that start to look at individual differences in emotion. The personality lecture looks at the relationship between the personality factors and emotion and motivation. Unconscious motivation considers the idea that perhaps there are things changing our behaviour and changing our thoughts motivationally that we're not fully aware of, and certainly. And then in the final lecture, or the second last lecture, we'll look at the humanistic or positive psychology movement, which relates to both motivation and emotion, and casts it in a contemporary framework that fits with things like the focus on happiness that is becoming more better known and gets more focus in psychology these days. And then, okay, so that's about where we're at. So chapter 11, nature of emotion, is structured around answering 5 underlying questions. The first one being, what is an emotion? And we touched on that briefly in the first tutorial when we had a go at defining motivation, had a go at defining emotion. And I said we'd come back to visiting not so much a definition, but really a conceptual understanding of emotion, because it's more complex than may initially meet the eye. And then we want to consider the antecedents or the underlying triggers or causes of an emotion, which are essentially significant life events that in some way seem to affect the fulfilment of your motivational needs, and that will lead us on to understanding what the purpose or the function of emotions are. One of the key questions that comes up and has attracted a fair bit of attention from academic psychologists is trying to work out what are the emotions, what are the core emotions or the innate emotions, and what are the derivative or learnt or acquired emotions that may follow on from the core emotions. So that's a little bit like the debate around how many personality factors are there, because depending on your theoretical perspective you come up with slightly different answers to that question. Having said that, there is some reasonable consensus, as there is with the big 5 personality factors, around about half a dozen core underlying emotions. And then we consider this question then, what is the purpose of emotions? What evolutionary function or adaptive function and purpose are they providing? And in that context, we take the point of view that all emotions are good, because all emotions serve an adaptive function, or they're designed to serve to facilitate your adaptation. So we consider what function those coping functions emotions provide. And finally, we'll look at the difference between emotion and mood, which are commonly probably thought to be the same thing, but we do make a distinction between those. Mainly that is that an emotion is a specifically triggered event that has a relatively short time period. So it can be tracked to a particular experience or event that happens. It comes, the emotion rises, and then it falls and it dissipates. Whereas a mood is more diffuse, not necessarily triggered by a particular event. It's a feeling, but it's distinct from emotions which are seen to be triggered by particular events. Okay, so we'll have a look at the definitional aspects, which includes the relationship between emotion and motivation, and that's something else to extract from this chapter and lecture, is to be able to bring together emotion and motivation and understand emotion in this context as a something that motivates and triggers motivational behaviours. What causes an emotion? The discussion there is mostly around biological causes versus cognitive causes, and potentially bringing those two systems together to see them as complementary parts of a complex system. And the biological and cognitive perspectives also run through the debate about how many emotions. So people who take a biological perspective come up with a different answer to how many emotions there are than people with a cognitive perspective. Function of the emotions, there are coping and social functions, which really boil down to evolutionary adaptive functions, and then emotion and mood. Now, I don't think those 5 perennial questions are by any means the full set of questions that we could be asking about emotion. So